Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Cesar Carino, your host, and our guest today is Eileen Gottwalt. Eileen, you're here for a lot of reasons today, but we have to identify specifically what those reasons are. First and foremost, we've been trying to get the mayors of all the living mayors in Wadsworth. And of course, Earl, your husband, was a mayor twice. Probably the only one in recent history who was a mayor twice. Earl's not in the best of shape, I understand. His health
his health is frail.
So we're going to have you talk for him. And your health is good, is it not?
Right.
I think 3 or 4 things we need to do before we even start here is to identify who Earl Gottwalt is, when he was born, where he was born, who his parents were, all things like that. And then we're going to find out the same things from you. And are you sensitive about your age, Eileen?
No.
Not at all?
No, that's no secret.
No secret at all. Everyone knows your age, right? Earl, born when?
Born July the 8th, 1913 in Barberton, Ohio.
So he's 84 years old.
84 years old.
And his parents were?
Earl and May Gottwalt.
Gottwalt.
And they lived in the North End, Barberton.
North End of Barberton.
Right.
Now, when did he come to Wadsworth?
I was thinking about that on the way over. I believe we came to Wadsworth after the big war, WW2.
WW2.
And I think it was about in 48.
48. Why did he come to Wadsworth?
He came to Wadsworth because I wanted to come.
You wanted to come to Wadsworth?
My mother's family was from Wadsworth.
Oh, really?
My mother was a Hoover girl.
A Hoover.
And mother's sisters and brothers lived here. Ray Hoover was my uncle.
Yes, I know Ray Hoover.
And Vernie Storm.
Ray Storm is your uncle, aunt?
Vernie Storm.
Oh, Vernie Storm.
Vernie Storm,
yes.
Arthur's mother.
Art's mother, right.
And I visited relatives here when I was a kid and always liked Wadsworth.
So you and he came to Wadsworth.
Right.
And where did Earl start working then in Wadsworth?
At Curtis Menswear.
Curtis Menswear.
Right, right.
We had Dick Curtis on the other day, and he told some stories about Earl that were just a barrel of laughs, and I'm sure that you have some of those as well. What did he do at Curtis Menswear?
Well, he was a salesman, and then ended up being part owner, and he spent a lot of hours there. People in retail spend a lot of hours. Your holidays aren't your own. You're there all of the time.
You bet. That's so very, very true.
Right.
Well, he went beyond that then. After he was with Curtis for a while, and he was part owner of Curtis, didn't he go to a dress shop?
Well, they bought the dress shop and also Tubasings.
And what was the dress shop name?
Bees.
It used to be Bees.
Bees, and then it was Curtis's.
And who owned Bees' dress shop before that? Do you remember?
Oh,
from Akron, wasn't he?
I forget his name.
He was a Jewish fellow from Akron.
Right.
Can't think of his name right now.
I can't think of his name.
But the Bees' dress shop at that time was, for the sake of history, we have to identify it. You know where Bees' dress shop was. I know where Bees' dress shop is. But for the sake of history, we have to identify it. It was immediately north of Brenneman's Drugstore, which is on the corner of Broad and High.
Right.
Did they keep it the name Bees' dress shop?
Oh, I think they changed it to Curtis.
Curtis.
I think they did, yeah.
Curtis Apparel or something like that.
Curtis Ladies Apparel.
Curtis Ladies Apparel.
Right.
And then Earl went up there and pretty well ran that store, didn't he?
Correct.
Now, you talked about Tubasings. Tubasings was across the street and south from the original Curtis Menswear, correct?
No, across the street on the corner where the office supply is, business supply is there.
Oh, Tubasings before that, though, was it not down at...
I don't know that.
I thought it was on Main Street at one time. But you're talking about Tubasings when it had moved over to where the Wright department store was, which is in the northwest corner of College and High Street, right? So Earl then, and did Dick Curtis also belong to that?
Right.
Dick Curtis and Earl owned Curtis Menswear, correct?
Right.
Then they also owned Curtis Ladies Apparel. And then across the street
was Tubasings.
Then did they continue with the name Tubasings with it?
You're asking some questions that that's hard for me to remember.
Well,
that I don't remember.
if we do,
I still think they kept it as tuba sings.
You can be assured, Eileen, that after the program is aired, that I'll get phone calls, and I do every single night.
Right.
And I'm really grateful for that because, we get a lot of correction. This is not a program to end all programs. All this is doing is putting some history on tape so that people who write the history.
Whether they changed the name or not. At that time, women did a lot of sewing at home. Mm-hmm. There was more sewing done, and their yard goods and patterns and those sewing supplies. That was a big part of that store.
It had been Wright's department store, and they had a lot of things which were dry goods. Is that right?
Right.
And then did Tubasings keep it that way?
Right.
Right. Do you remember anything about the Tubasings? Harold Tubasing and his wife?
I just remember that they were really a good-looking couple, very lovely couple,
nicest
really,
people in the world.
really nice-looking couple.
They had children who would be probably close to 70 years old now.
I would think so.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sure that's true.
Right.
The three stores. How long did they keep the three stores? Do you remember that?
No, I really don't. I don't remember that when they dissolved those stores.
Now, we're going to come back to that in a couple of minutes, but we have to figure out what you were doing all this time. You were not sitting home, correct?
No, no.
What were you doing?
Well, I was at B&W. Before then, I worked at City Hall.
Which City Hall?
Wadsworth City Hall. In the late 50s till 1957.
And what did you do in the Wadsworth City Hall in the late 50s?
I did everything.
You did everything.
I was secretary to the service director.
And who was at that time?
Frank Randall.
Right. And we need to hear about him tonight, too.
Okay, I worked for Frank Randall. Merriman was the mayor. I also did posting for the electric department. I was the registrar for births and deaths. And I think the most frustrating part of the job was taking care of the park reservations.
Park reservations.
Right.
And at that time, we didn't have too many parks,
No,
did we?
but that gave me a real good background for the job with the chamber.
Right.
I knew the streets and the churches and things like that.
You knew everything about that.
Long before Earl was involved.
You were in the City Hall during what years again, Eileen?
The late 50s. I left there in 57. I was there from 52 until 57.
52 to 57. Let's talk about Frank Randall for a couple seconds. Frank Randall followed his father, was that right?
Right.
His father was whom?
Oh. His brother was Howard.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of his dad's name.
Well, it'll come to you.
Right.
And Frank Randall was the service director for, what, 4, 5, or 6 years?
Oh, more than that.
Was
More
he?
than that. A longer time than that.
How long was he service director?
You're asking some questions that people are going to think, boy, that girl has no memory at all. I do have a good memory, but I don't remember that. Mm-hmm. But when Frank retired, then I continued, and service directors with short terms were Bob Booker.
Bob Booker.
And can't think. Oh, anyway. Then I left and went to B&W, and I was with B&W for 27 years.
Right. Now, at B&W, what did you do?
Well, I started as a secretary and then moved into becoming an executive secretary.
Right. For whom?
I worked for 7 vice presidents and the president of the company. I worked first for, let me think. Can't think of them, but 7 vice presidents. And then I was transferred from being a secretary to a manager of training and development,
right,
and transferred to Lynchburg, Virginia in that capacity.
You were you're part of the National Professional Secretaries Group, too.
Right.
As a matter of fact, long before I knew who Eileen Gottwalt was, I was called upon to give a talk, and you were there.
Right.
And I can't remember now what the girl's name, or the lady's name who brought me in, but when I looked around and I saw the names, they had a roster of names there, and I saw your name, I said, oh my heavens, I'm speaking to some people here who have won awards nationally, and they should be doing the talking. But you listen very attentively, which is not always the case because you're such a powerful person. And we love that part about you, the fact that you just take charge, and that's why you became the office manager and the training person for B&W.
That was an outstanding job. It really was.
Great job.
I still hear from the people in Lynchburg.
At the time that you went to Lynchburg, Virginia, Your husband was doing what?
He was the mayor.
Mayor of Wadsworth.
He was in a third term. You said 2 terms. Earl had 3 terms.
But I mean, he had 3 terms, but one, there was a split term.
Right.
There was a separation,
Right,
and then,
right.
that's what I meant by
Right. Well,
twice mayor.
That last term was in 78,
Right.
and we left in 81. So he had 2+ years.
Do you remember against whom he ran the first time? Bill Neeser?
Yes.
Bill Neeser, right. And then against whom did he run the second time? Everett Perkins?
Everett Perkins.
Right. Mhm. He was mayor 2 terms for the first time that he ran.
Right,
Then you and he moved to Virginia.
in 81.
So therefore, at that time, Tony Perry took over as mayor.
Correct.
Because he was
Finished that
president of the
term.
council to finish that term. And then Tom Cox became the mayor, did he not?
Right.
And then Earl came back and became a mayor again. Is that correct?
No, he didn't
No.
become mayor when we came back from Virginia.
Well, tell us how he became mayor 2 different times then.
Well, he was mayor first in 1964 through 66, a 2-year term.
Okay, a 2-year term there.
And then the terms were increased to 4 years. So he was mayor the second time from 66 to 70. And then he went to Old Phoenix Bank, and then in 78 became mayor again until 81, until we left.
Okay.
But after we went to Virginia, he was out of politics.
He was out of politics by that time.
He came back and was the director of the chamber for a while.
He was the director of the chamber.
He was the director of the chamber.
And then you became the director of the chamber.
Right.
This is kind of a cat and mouse game.
A little bit.
A little bit.
A little
That's great. We're going to talk about the chamber in a few minutes and your involvement in it and his involvement in it. But let's go back now to his mayor following the time that he left the stores. Did they sell them? Did he get out of them? What did
Yeah,
they
they
do?
sold them.
They sold them. So he's out of the stores now,
Right.
all 3 of them. And now he becomes mayor of Wadsworth.
Right.
And during that period of time, was he doing anything else other than being the mayor of Wadsworth?
No.
None. When he was mayor of Wadsworth, what were the important things that were going on the first time that he was mayor?
I don't know if I have them in the right sequence or not, but Earl always says that he thinks the most important thing that he did, the thing that he's proudest of, was persuading Bill Lyron to come back to Wadsworth from Los Angeles.
He was in Los Angeles.
And Bill came back as service director. And of course, Bill and Elaine and their family are pillars of the community.
They surely are.
And he's run City Hall for all of those years since.
Yes, he has. He's just been an absolutely outstanding person all of these years. And then Earl was responsible for bringing him back to Wadsworth.
There were a lot of phone calls to get him here.
A lot of phone calls to getting him here.
Right.
What was happening to Randall at the time? Was he leaving, or Booker and the person who followed Booker?
Well, Frank got married and went to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
He was no longer involved in the city at that time.
Frank Randall, you mean?
Yes.
And then following Frank was Bill Booker.
Bob Booker.
Bob Booker.
And they were not involved in the city when they left.
Now then, the person who followed Bob Booker became a professor at the University of Akron, and his name will come to me in a few minutes. He was the service director for a little while here in Wadsworth. And I can't think of it right now, but it'll come to us. And then at that time, Earl was trying to get Bill Lyman to come from Los Angeles. So at that time, Bill was probably only 25 or 26
very young.
Years old, but a very sharp individual.
Right.
Bill's family had grown up in Wadsworth. His father was a teacher in the Wadsworth schools. His mother was a nurse. And in one of our previous programs, the bus driver who picked up Bill's mother with horse and buggy to take her to school was one of our guests, and that would be Bill Ream. So we go back many, many years. How did Earl know about Bill?
Well, Bill, I believe, was working in a capacity at the city before he went to L.A., and Earl knew him then. I think that was true. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, we're going to be interviewing Bill later on anyway, and we'll ask that same question.
I think so.
Because we need to know. What other kinds of things happened during Earl's first tour of duty in the mayor's job?
As I said, I don't know if I have them in sequence or not, but I can review some of the things that he did.
Go ahead. If you have some notes there, just read them.
That he's proud of.
Okay, that's what
And
we
I
need to
think
hear.
a lot of the people in town don't realize, because his name is not on the cornerstone of those things, that he was in the background. He started them, and then when they're finished, your name isn't
That's right.
on
Well,
that.
his personality is such that he never once looked
He's a
for...
quiet person.
Very quiet. He never looked for anything that was glitzy. He just a quiet kind of a person, a good mover. Tell us what some of those things are, Eileen.
Well, the City Hall renovation and enlargement.
In other words, at that time,
There was-
the fire station was immediately adjacent to City Hall. They tore that down,
Right.
or not, didn't tear it down. I guess they did something with it. And they purchased the plumbing place.
Right.
Name of the plumbing place, can't think of it right now, which was right next.
Right. I can't either.
Libes, no.
Lives.
Libes Plumbing,
Libes.
right next door. And they made all of City Hall right there.
Right. The airport administration building, and he did that with the assistance of Fred Neuenswander and Governor Rhodes. And Fred Neuenswander was, I believe, the first director of the Chamber of Commerce.
That's right, exactly. And I remember when that happened. He was coming through town, and he said, this would be a nice place to start a chamber.
Right.
He did that. His wife and I taught together, Jane Neuenswander. Jane was a very powerful woman, and Fred was a very powerful person, too.
We hear from them. Jane has died.
Oh, Jane died.
And Fred's
I
remarried.
didn't realize that.
Well, the Senior Citizens Building, that came about from some money from the county.
What was at that time the Masonic Temple?
Right across from City Hall.
Right, that was the
Right.
Masonic Temple.
Right.
And the city was able to procure that, is that correct?
Right.
And the county of Medina gave us some money to do that.
Right.
Do you have any idea how much money that was?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. And of course, then Steiner Youth Center.
Steiner Youth Center.
That came about because of a bequest, or of a bequeath from Mr. Steiner.
Henry Steiner.
For underprivileged children in Wadsworth. And of course, there weren't too many of those underprivileged children.
And Steiner was Henry Steiner from Steiner and Rohr, which is where the Board of Education office is right now in Wadsworth. And then it later became Barton and Rohr, and Sam Barton died a few years ago at the age of 100 or 101. And Mr. Rohr's, Claude Rohr's son, Bob, is still living in town. So we need to get those things out so that people know what the genesis is here.
Sterling Sechrist provided a lot of assistance on that project. Getting the money.
And in what way? What was Sterling's responsibility at that time? What was he doing? Was he county commissioner?
I think he was county commissioner, and of course, I think the money that Steiner left at that time was a fortune.
$100,000.
But then now it's peanuts.
Nothing at all. I was
Now
on
it's
council when
peanuts.
that happened.
Right.
We had to match it, and it turned out to be,
Right.
I think it was $100,000.
I think so.
Maybe it wasn't very much more than that, but we have a beautiful edifice as a result of that. And Mr. Steiner said that no child who was underprivileged would be turned away for recreation.
Yes, I don't know how children have to pay there now, but I guess there are special.
Yes, there are.
Special things for special people.
That's right, exactly. That's right, exactly.
The downtown renovation, of course, that was Firestone Store, the restaurant, Ritzman's, and the parking lot. That was all done during Earl's regime, but he did that with the help of Jack Wood from Bernard Construction. At one time, I believe those buildings belonged to Bernard Construction, and people rented from them until they were bought.
You mean the ones behind...
I mean the Firestone Store and the restaurant.
Oh, I see, okay.
Okay. But that was a big project. Earl and I had been to New York, and I believe it was at the Tavern the Green, where it's paved with paving and the trees, and that's where we got the idea for that paving for the walkways.
Between what is now the end of Bixler's store to Richmond Center. That walkway. That used to be an alley.
Yeah, a muddy alley.
A muddy alley. You wouldn't walk back there even in the daylight.
Right.
Now it's a beautiful place.
Okay, and that was a lengthy project. The North End Shopping Complex, which very controversial. Some people like it, some people don't. But Earl's very proud, and he'd like to take the credit for Bueller's being here, for Old Phoenix Bank, and for McDonald's. And those were all time-consuming jobs.
They surely were.
I only remember the phone calls.
The phone calls.
And that he was never home.
That, unfortunately, is part of politicians or a person who's in public life. The phone calls, your telephone is no longer your own after you once become a public figure. Earl had been with the old Phoenix Bank.
Right.
And I think that what you're seeing here is that association, that relationship, helped to bring together some of these kinds of things that happened in the North End. Is that correct?
Right, right. Well, when Old Phoenix was contemplating moving to Wadsworth, they had heard of Earl, knew Earl, and thought he'd be helpful in, one, finding the land, two, helping them with find employees, and that he did.
Now, the Old Phoenix Bank is no longer called Old Phoenix Bank. They change names once a week, so I don't know what it is this week.
I think it's First Merit.
First Merit Bank, right. When Buellers came to town, the Bueller boys from Orrville in Worcester area, Orrville came to town. There was all they had there was a box. Right. They didn't have one thing in it, and someone from town, possibly Earl, I'm not so sure, said, a friend of mine is at the University of Akron, Caesar Carino. He might be able to give you some students to come over here to do a market survey. So Mr. Bueller came over, a young Mr. Bueller at that time, probably is 70 years old now, but at that time he came over and sat in my office and identified himself as very humble, and he said, I really need to have somebody to help me to do a market survey, and could you provide me with some people? Well, in a matter of about 5 minutes, I was able to get 15 people for him. Some of them followed him over so they would know the way, and then for the next 3 or 4 weeks, they did that. Well, following that, Mr. Bueller came over again and he said, now, we got the market survey done and we find that it's going to be necessary for us to get into that store as quickly as possible because Wadsworth is hungry for a Bueller's. Now, what I need are a bunch of hard-working young lads to help put up shelves because we have to get them up within the next week. And usually it takes a month or two to get them all up. Can you help me? No problem. I had all kinds of students there who were looking for work. I sent them over, including my own nephew, who was looking for a job at the time. And in 1 week's time, they set up all the shelves in Bueller's.
I never heard of that story before. That's fantastic.
And I oftentimes wondered, he said, someone from Wadsworth told me, and I oftentimes wondered if Earl hadn't been the one to tell him. I
don't know that.
Because Earl is not the type of person who makes any big fuss about things. He would just think. Going back to City Hall again, there were some problems in the administration at that time, too. What were those? We had some tremendous successes, but there were some problems. Do you remember any of the problems that occurred in City Hall during that period of time? Let's relate it particularly to the renovation of downtown. What happened there? Did we have some people who...
Well, I think in a small town where the population has been static, where new people haven't come in, the trend is we don't want change. We don't want it to grow. We want to keep it the same way. And I think most of us resist change. I remember the first electric typewriter I saw. No way was I ever going to operate that thing.
And now they're passé. You can't even find one.
That's right. But I think that it was just resistance to change.
I can remember the fact that the whole process was stopped because of 1 or 2 people.
Right.
But there were some negotiations, and I think that it went forward. The person who did the downtown, who actually developed it in terms of the engineering and all of that, was Jim Phelps. Do you remember that name at all?
No, I don't.
Jim Phelps is now economic development or something like that, the associate mayor for economic development in Akron. And he's been there for many, many years. But he actually came to Wadsworth. And actually, now this brick goes here and that curve goes there. And
I'm sorry that Earl couldn't be here because he'd know more about those things than I do.
Well, we're so grateful that you have this many things. Tell us who the staff members were in City Hall with Earl at the time, and when did a very powerful secretary come into the group?
Thelma?
Thelma.
Thelma took my job when I left in 57.
That's what I wanted to hear you say. Yeah. Thelma came in 57.
57.
And she stayed for another 20 years.
Right.
And where did Thelma come from?
Ohio Match.
And how long had she been there?
Well, she'd retired.
She retired from the Ohio Match. Thelma Schaefer.
Right.
S-H-A-E-F-F-E-R? Or how did we spell Thelma Schaefer for the sake of posterity?
I think it's just S-H-A-F-E.
F-F-E.
No, one
One
F.
F? S-H-A-F-E-R.
I think.
Okay. We just want to make sure because Schaefer can be spelled so many ways. To whom did she become secretary then?
Well, she was Earl's secretary, and I think she was, no, she wasn't. She was Bill Lyron's.
Bill Lyron's secretary.
Secretary.
Who was Earl's secretary at the time?
He had a couple of them. Oh, Caesar, I'm embarrassed.
Not at all,
Remember.
not at all.
I don't remember.
You know, we told everyone how old Earl was a little while ago. We're going to have to start telling people how old you are because no one's going to believe that you're
Oh, I think they were.
you're just a little less than 100.
No, I'll be 78 January, January 9th.
January 9th, you'll be 78.
Right, we're born in 1920.
1920.
I hope that figures.
It is. It does figure perfectly, and you're in wonderful shape, and we're grateful for all of your memories today. Who was the safety director under Earl?
Well, Tom Gertner was one.
One. And how about Jim Leadham?
Yeah, that's right, Jim Leadham.
They were
That's
safety
right.
directors. And at the time, who was the chief of police? Was
Rod.
Was Rod still there? And then Bernie followed Rod. Rod Lonier, and then
Right.
Bernard Tye followed
Right.
him. There were some advancements in the police force under Earl's administration. When he went in there were only 7 or 8 policemen. How many policemen were in the force when he finally left, about 15 years later or something?
I would have no idea.
I think it was up to 20, very close to 20.
I would have no idea.
And the other thing that happened during Earl's administration, as I remember it, because I was on council at the time, that happened during Earl's administration was the fact that the police pay was beginning to become increased. At the one time, they were making less than a person working at McDonald's almost, you know, nothing wrong with McDonald's, but, you know, it's not a very high-paying job. And that was increased. Earl had a particular finesse in being able to get things done without making a fuss about it. He had a direct approach. Tell us a little bit about Earl Gottwalt's personality. I mean, let's start with sense of humor. What kind of humor did he have?
Well, you've got to be alert or you'll miss it.
Okay, and why is that?
It's a dry sense of humor.
Dry sense of humor. Give us an example of a dry sense of humor that Earl has. That's hard to do on a moment's notice.
That's hard to do. That's hard to do.
And did he chuckle a lot to himself about various things?
I don't think so.
He was just had a dry sense of humor.
He was a quiet person.
Very quiet person. What about his burning desire to do things? I mean, if he had a cause, how did he react to the cause?
Whenever Earl does anything, I don't think there's much wasted motion.
Just does it.
He just does it.
Yeah.
He
Just do it, as they
That's
say.
correct.
Just do it, right. And what about his warmth and compassion?
Well, I think anybody that's an animal lover has a lot of that.
A lot of love and
I
compassion.
kind of judge people by that. I don't mean that you have to be an animal lover to be a friend.
But he loves animals.
Right.
He has a particular bent for being compassionate and warm and sensitive, yet he was reserved, so sometimes you didn't always feel that, but you knew it was there.
Yeah, a quiet
You
person.
knew fully well that if Earl said, "I'm your friend," that he is your friend.
And I also learned from living with him for 53 years that when he had something to say, it was usually pretty important. You know, listen.
You better listen.
Right.
We have to move on because we're going to run out of time here, and I'd like to go from the time that he was the chamber executive secretary. What were those years, Eileen?
Well, that was after we came back from Virginia. I think that was probably 85.
And how
We
long?
forgot one thing.
Okay, let's
We
go.
forgot about Menoir.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Very important. Tell us about Menoir.
Well, Earl worked closely with the Mennonite church. They had the idea, but didn't know how to go about getting it. And I believe they got some state aid, I don't know, state aid or U.S. aid in developing that. And they had to have so many tenants and so much money up front. But there was a lot of footwork done to get that going.
Where did Menoir build, and from whom did they get the property? You remember?
Well, they built on the corner of Akron Road and
High Street,
and High Street.
261 and 94.
Right, right.
And that was a farm at one time.
That was a farm.
Yes. And do you remember whose farm it might have been at the time?
I can't think of that. The only name I'm thinking of is Good, and I don't believe it was.
Don't think so. I'm not positive myself, but I'm sure that somebody will tell us whose farm that was.
Well, the farmhouse is still on High Street.
That's right. That's right, exactly.
And I think the man is still living.
Who?
The man who owns
Yes.
the farmhouse is still living.
Yes, that's right. In 1997, the man is still living.
Right.
What were the problems, particularly with Menoir? What were the, did you remember a problem that they had with taxation?
I don't remember that.
The minister of the Mennonite church at the time, a red-headed fellow, and I can't think of his name right now, a wonderful person, was opposed to getting any tax credits for a religious institution. He didn't feel that they should. And there was somewhat of a controversy, not a serious one, but a little controversy regarding that. And I think that they finally well, I guess, acceded to the fact that they could certainly purchase the land and do everything without being taxed, because churches are not taxed in Ohio and perhaps even in the United States, but surely they are not taxed in Ohio. And that was a little bit of a controversy for a time when it was being built.
I don't remember that.
Yes, I remember it because I was on council at the time. And someone mentioned it to me. As a matter of fact, I had a nice long talk with the minister about it, and I certainly respected it.
Anyway, it's there, and it's a lovely,
it's a
nice
lovely place.
facility, right?
A lot of people live there. Did we forget anything else there?
Not that
Okay. Let's go then to the chamber. And what was the chamber doing at that time? Where was this office, and who were the principals in the chamber when Earl was the
the offices were above Citizens Bank building.
upstairs, the third floor, wasn't it not? Third
And
floor.
Karen Ware was his secretary.
Karen Ware, spell that, W-E-I-R.
W-E-I-R.
W-E-I-R. And what was Karen? Where was she from?
She wasn't from this
No,
area.
she wasn't from this area at all, as a matter of
No,
fact.
I can't answer.
And I don't know that she lives in Wadsworth now.
I think she does. I think she
Oh,
lives
does
on
she?
Red Rock.
Oh, okay, fine. Karen Ware lives on Red Rock. And she was the secretary, and that's
Right.
all that's all you had up there, was it not?
That's correct.
Earl was not a full-time
That's part-time.
council chair. If it's not too personal, do you have any idea how much he made a year?
Oh, he probably made less than I did, and I made nothing. I think he made around maybe 500 a month, 350, 500 a month.
So in other words, maybe 6,000 a year, something like
Right.
that. And then who took over the chairmanship or the executive director's position after Earl left?
Karen?
Karen Weir.
Yes,
For how long?
about a year.
Year. Earl was there how many years, did you say?
I think not much over a year.
Not over a year. Then Karen Weir stayed for 1 year, and then who followed her?
I did.
Eileen Gottwalt
Right.
followed you. Now, we need to find out a little bit about Eileen Gottwalt before we go much farther here, because we still haven't had a chance to say who you are. What was your maiden name, Eileen?
Sauber.
Sauber.
S-A-U-B-E-R.
S-A-U-B-E-R.
I was born in Barberton.
Barberton.
And graduated from Barberton High School.
In what year? 1937.
1937.
And your mother was?
Mabel Hoover.
Hoover from?
Wadsworth.
And what Hoover families here are still here? What relatives are still here from the Hoovers?
Constance Hoover married to, can't think of it. That's terrible.
Don't feel bad. One of the guests the other day, we had to stop the show and start over again, couldn't think of his wife's maiden name.
Oh, no, but this is Connie Hoover. I'll think of it.
Well, it'll come to you when we're not thinking of it. And who else is living in Wadsworth here now from the Hoovers?
The Storms, Pauline Storm was married to a cousin of mine who's died.
Who was Art Storm?
Art Storm, right.
Storm.
And that's about all.
And where did Art Storm live most of his life?
Wadsworth.
Where?
Parkview,
Parkview. Before that, the Storms lived where? Do you remember?
Summit Street.
And then before that,
I don't know anything
Silver
before
Creek.
that. Oh, did they?
Yes. As a matter of fact, they lived at the bottom of the hill in the valley of Silver Creek, and the Floods lived at the top. And in the late 20s and the early 30s, we always said we had the Floods at the top and the Storms at the bottom.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't
Lived
know
there for a
that.
short period of time. Then Art Storm had children, and we're going to talk about Art Storm in a couple of minutes because he was associated with the city as well, was he not? City of Wadsworth?
The grandfather.
Grandfather.
Right.
But not Art himself?
Oh, no, Art wasn't.
Okay, just the grandfather.
His grandfather.
And what did he do, the grandfather?
I
think he was in the street department.
he was in the street department, I believe. But
for
that was,
years and years and years and
and
years.
I don't remember
yeah,
his
yeah.
name.
Now, one of the Storms then moved to Norton, in the old schoolhouse in Norton, on just beyond the County Line Road, and they lived in one half of the old schoolhouse. Would that be the same Storm family?
I don't know that.
Don't remember that. Okay. Now, your mother was a native of Wadsworth.
Right.
And how did she meet your father, and where were they? And
Well, that's a good story.
that's what I like to hear.
They met during the Armistice Day, a parade in Wadsworth. My dad was a handsome sailor, and I guess he saw my mother, who was a pretty young gal, and he looked her up after the parade, and then they were married.
That was on November 11th, 1918?
Right.
That was Armistice Day.
Right.
We now call it Veterans Day.
Right.
But what was significant about Armistice Day? That was the day that the armistice was signed in World War I.
Right.
It's signed at what time?
11 o'clock.
On the 11th day of the 11th month.
Right.
And that was Armistice Day.
Correct.
And all the years that you went to school and all the years that I went to school, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we stood and faced east for 1 minute.
And it was silence.
Silent,
That's correct.
absolute silence. We did that for years and
Right.
years and years. Now you can't get people to remain silent when they're playing the Star Spangled Banner.
Right.
The
Sad to see those things go.
oh, I hate to see them go because that shows the disrespect for something which so many people fought for and died for. Mom and Dad then had how many children altogether?
We had, mother and dad had 6 children.
And
I was the oldest, then I have a brother Larry. Larry was, no, I take that back. I was the oldest, and then there were 2 sons who died as infants. And then my brother Larry, who was quite a war hero in the Korean War, and he was killed in an airplane crash in Germany in '52. He was a fighter pilot, and his jet exploded at 1,000 feet. And then I have a brother, Carl, who's an attorney in St. Louis, and I have a sister, Vivian, who's quite an artist and lives in Brooklyn.
Vivian is quite young, is she not?
Vivian is 70 years old.
Oh, she's 70?
She's 70. Carl is
Oh,
the
who
youngest.
is the youngest one?
Carl.
Carl, okay. Carl is...
He's 14 years younger than I.
I knew that there's a big difference between
He's
you and
14 years
and
younger,
your
and
youngest
Vivian
sibling.
is
Now, your father was born in Wadsworth, too?
No, my father was born in Barberton. He was born in Cleveland, but lived in Barberton.
Lived in Barberton. And Mom saw him at the Armistice Day Parade. They got married then, and then you were born
Right.
in 1920.
Right.
Now, that makes you 77 years old and 78 on January
Right.
9th. You went to school in Barberton, graduated from Barberton High School, and then we followed you all the way through here, but now we are up to the point where you are going to be the executive secretary. Your office was where at the time?
On North Lyman.
North Lyman Street. Could you describe what it looked like and how it got there and what was next door to it
Well, it was virtually just like a little storeroom. It wasn't much of an office. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't there wasn't much room in there, but there was room for 2 desks, very narrow and long. It was part of Bill Simmons' empire there.
Okay, now Bill Simmons was whom, and what did Bill Simmons do, and where's Bill Simmons now?
Well, I think he built a new building on Wall Street.
Right, a Wall Road.
And Wall Road.
He had the Star Supply.
Right.
And the Star Supply had what?
Furniture, sweeper
Sweepers and-
repair, and picnic supplies, all kind of napkins, tablecloths, those kinds of supplies.
And Bill Simmons came from where?
I don't have any idea.
Canal
about Bill.
Fulton.
I don't have any
And
doubt.
Bill Simmons's father was Will Simmons, whose father, or rather whose family lived in this house right next door to the schoolhouse in Norton, right just a few houses east of County Line Road, where the Storms lived. And the Simmons family was widespread throughout all of northeastern Ohio.
I didn't know that.
And they were heavily involved with the chemical company. And Bill Simmons is the grandson of this whole group. And he came to Wadsworth, built the Star Supply, and now it's down on Wall Road.
Understand that we were grateful to have that, because we didn't pay any rent for a long time.
Right.
And then we paid just a little, but it was workable, and we made it work. We built some shelves, so we had storage in Bill's storage building, so it was very workable.
It's extremely workable, and it was certainly
for the money we had.
That's right. Now, 3 questions before we come to what you did as the executive secretary. Your secretary at that time was Jan Kitzmiller, and she's still there.
Right.
And how did you happen to get Jan?
I knew her at B&W.
And she was the secretary.
But she was not the first secretary I had. Ann Campbell was there first.
Oh, Ann Campbell was there before.
Right,
Ann.
and Ann's husband got a job out of state. And then I had to look for a new secretary. And did some interviewing and saw Jan Kitzmiller on the street one day. And she had been curtailed at B&W, one of their downsizing.
Is that one of those nice words for that she no longer had a job?
Yeah, she was without a job. And I didn't know Jan too well at B&W, but we talked, and I listened. I knew that she was a very capable secretary. She worked for a group of 12 engineers, and I knew she had to produce. So on the basis of what I knew about her work record, and of course her family record, I hired her. I thought it would be a good team. Jan is kind of laid back, shy, but she's very accurate in whatever she does. And I don't think I'm shy. So
no, you're not shy, Eileen.
We thought we would make a pretty good team, and it did work out.
And it worked out beautifully.
She took care of the office work. She did it all.
Now, Jan is from Wadsworth.
Right.
And I'm going to spell her last name, her maiden name, because few people can spell it. Miragiotta.
A?
Miragiotta. And she is a product of the Kruppe on the mother's side. And Jan, of course, Miragiotta, her father was Miragiotta. Now, she has a brother who is a singer,
right,
and nationally known,
right,
just a very outstanding person. We're going to try to interview him as one of Wadsworth's outstanding performers in later shows. Jan Kitzmiller, that's question number 1. Question number 2, how many people were in the chamber at the time, and what was really happening to the chamber at that time?
There were just 2 of us. You mean in the office?
No, I mean in the Chamber of Commerce.
Well, when I interviewed, I was told that they had about 200 members. And they did have 200 members, like, on the books. But as I delved into it, there were a lot who had moved out of town, who hadn't paid their dues, so it ended up being about 134, truly.
134 members.
Paid members.
And the next question is, what was the very first thing that you did as Chamber Executive Secretary in terms of making yourself known throughout the community?
Well, first of all, I made a commitment I would double membership. I made a commitment that I would meet every member of the Chamber. I made a commitment that I would work closely as I could with City Hall, with Bill Lyron, Chris Easton, to try to develop a packet that we could give to newcomers to the town to invite them to come to our city. Those are the things that, and I wanted to enhance the newsletter. I guess those are some of the things I wanted to do in the very beginning.
Now, the next question, did you do it?
I did.
You did?
When I left, there were 287 members.
287 members, paid up.
Right. Everybody was paid right up.
No one gets by, Eileen,
No.
without paying up.
I don't know what the membership is now.
I have no idea.
I doubt that it's more
But
than
I
that.
know that you bear the reputation for having more than double the chamber during your, how long were you there?
87 to 90, 91.
3 years. In 3 years, you
4 years,
4
yeah.
years, you almost doubled. Now,
Yeah, just about 4 years.
Eileen, have you ever worked a full-time job?
Have I ever worked a full-time?
Full-time job?
You mean with the chamber? Or,
No, with anyone.
Yeah, with B&W.
Worked full-time.
And
That isn't accurate. That isn't accurate.
well,
There's no such thing as Eileen working a full-time job. She works 1, 2, 3 times what she's supposed to.
well,
Right?
everybody's different. Everybody
And that's
has.
what you do.
Well,
Now, how did you get 287 members? By working, how many hours a week were you supposed to work?
It was a part-time job,
How many hours?
25.
And you made how much?
Well, I think I started for 500. And then when I left, I believe I was making 800.
That's phenomenal. How many hours a week, how many hours a day did you have to work to bring that up to 287 people?
Well, I probably worked a good 6 hours at the office, but I brought a lot of work home.
And then what did you do about going into the various stores and the various businesses, did you?
Well, I did a lot of that on my own time.
On your own time? Oh, on your own time.
I didn't
see.
call that working
You
time.
didn't call that working time?
No. And I didn't wine and dine at lunchtime either.
You didn't wine and dine?
No.
You just went out there and...
Well, I don't think you accomplish much really business when you're lunching.
No, because you eat.
You eat.
I always had, I was an administrator the biggest part of my life, and I never had meetings that had food.
Yeah, you eat. You don't.
When you meet, you meet. When you eat, you eat.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be criticized for that, but I just didn't bring the two together. And to this very day, when I work, and when I eat, I don't work. I eat. Unfortunately, I eat too much. But I think that you were doing the same thing. You have the credit then for having more than double. You went from 134 to 287, which is more than 200%. You left the chamber in 1991, and then you and Earl moved to Barberton.
Right, we moved.
And you stayed there, and Earl's health was beginning to wane at that time, was
Right.
it not? You've been there now for 7 years in Barberton, and your heart seems to be still in Wadsworth. You still come back to Wadsworth, and I remember when I called you to appear on this show, I might as well have been talking to a native of Wadsworth because you know all about Wadsworth. Do you remember the feelings that you had and the feelings that Earl had when you, A, moved to Virginia and then moved back, and why did you move back, and then moved from Wadsworth to Barberton?
Well, the move to Virginia, and I'll be very candid and very honest, was a move, I think, a little bit for my ego. And I wanted to see, I was given a big job. I was manager of manpower training and development for a division of highly technical people, a division of 1,600 people. And it was a little bit of an ego for me to see, I'm a non-degreed person. If I could go and help this, that's a highly degreed, a very sophisticated division of the company. It was an ego thing and money. I got more of a promotion than I had in 25 years, all totaled. And I think most important, it was for Earl and I to see if we'd like the South, because retirement was, not too far away. When we got there, of course, it was a reverse role for Earl, and I'm forever grateful that he did go with this in mind. But he missed Wadsworth. He expected people to come and meet him, and they don't. And so we were only there 2 years, almost to the day, and decided to come back. At that time, Earl's sister was having some problems, and he's kind of a father figure for the family, so we came back. I would have stayed in Lynchburg forever. I loved it. We had a gorgeous home, and we made a lot of friends. And I guess my family is so scattered, it didn't make any difference where I lived. And I'm able to make friends wherever I live. But I loved Virginia, and I still miss it.
And you came back, though?
And we came back, and we looked for a house in Wadsworth, and at that particular time, there just wasn't anything in the market. So we did buy a house in Doylestown, and we were only there a couple years, and we found a house in Wadsworth, the house on Crestwood.
Oh, in
house on Crestwood. And we lived there, and then Earl started to have some serious health problems. And I knew I couldn't manage the big house, and Earl's brother lives in Barberton. So we looked at some condos which are very nice, close to a hospital, close to shopping, not too far from Wadsworth. So we decided to make that move. It's been a good move, but we do miss Wadsworth. But a lot of our friends are dead in Florida, in California. The climate of the town has changed. You know, there aren't a lot of old-timers left. That doesn't, we still, I guess, call Wadsworth home.
That's wonderful. Before we go to the part we need to talk about with Earl, let's just piggyback on what you just said. Do people from Wadsworth come to visit you?
Yes.
In Barberton?
Right.
And who are some of the people recently who have come to visit that also are very old, I guess, 90s?
Well, the Merrimans have visited us twice.
The Merrimans.
And that's really enchanting when you have the Merrimans. Don doesn't hear well, Earl doesn't hear well, and Opal, his hearing is not as great as it could be. So it just kind of vibrates in the house. I'm the only hearing one.
Non-hearing impaired.
But we enjoy them. Tom Cox comes. Sterling Seacrest occasionally when he's in town. I don't think there are many others from Wadsworth who. That's it, probably.
I think that it's significant to note that the Merrimans come to visit. The Merrimans are the strongholds of the Democratic Party for all of these years, and the Gottwalts have been the Republicans, and yet they're very, very close friends. So that's what Wadsworth is. It doesn't make any difference what your politics are. The fact is that we love people, and that's what's important. We need to find out who Earl was in terms of his mother, his father, mother's maiden name, father, where they worked, brothers and sisters, and so forth. Can you go through that?
Why did you ask me her maiden name?
Well, if you can't do it, it's perfectly all right. But
his dad was Earl Gottwalt. His mother was May Hattie. Earl's the oldest. He had, I think, two sisters, a sister who died in infancy, and another one who was killed in an automobile wreck when she was a small girl. He has a brother living, Robert, and the two youngest ones in the family, Roy, who was a Democratic mayor of Clinton, died early, and his sister Donna Jean died early. So the two oldest are living, and the youngest ones
are all dead.
Right.
What did Earl's father do in Barberton?
He worked at PPG.
And what kind of work did he do?
I don't even know for sure.
Just he worked in the factory, perhaps?
Right, he worked in the factory.
And what about the other brothers? Now, one of his brothers was in politics. The one who died, was at the
and the other one,
Clinton.
Bob, his lifetime was at PPG.
At PPG also.
Right.
And what kind of work did he do?
He worked out at the mine. He was an equipment operator.
Equipment operator in the mines.
Right.
Earl was the only one really who came to Wadsworth and stayed in Wadsworth. All the rest of them are still in Barberton, or were in Barberton, or in Clinton, or somewhere else, but not in Wadsworth.
No.
There are no Gottwalts in Wadsworth at the present time.
That's correct.
Right. Now, for the sake of history, I know the answer to this question, but for the sake of history, you and Earl did not have children.
No, Earl has a daughter.
Has a daughter.
Yes, Jane Ann.
From a previous
marriage.
Yes. And Jane Ann is probably how old now?
It's easy to remember. She's 20 years younger than I am.
20 years, so she is
57.
57. She's born in 1940 then.
Right.
Where is Jane Ann?
She's in Barberton. Her mother has passed on, and Jane Ann is retired from B&W. She kind of she has an easy life. She's a golfer. She never married. She travels. And she and her dad and the three of us have a nice relationship.
That's wonderful. That Jane Ann then is still very much in evidence in the family.
Right.
And that's good. 3 or 4 more questions that I have to ask you about yourself, and then I have 2 more that I would like to ask about Earl, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to make them very, very quick. About yourself, first and foremost. It would be interesting for us to know what the National Secretary's organization is. People think that it's just a social organization, but how do you become involved with the professional secretary?
And they've changed that name to professional secretaries.
Professional Secretary Association.
It was national secretaries.
Right.
Well, you have to be referred by a couple of the members. I no longer belong to that association, and it's comprised of secretaries, clerks, whatever, in the Akron area. Very visible with helping new secretaries. And we had a lot of programs at Akron U.
That's right.
When EEO, when women were being advanced because the law said you had to be. So we worked to try to prepare them to get ready for these new jobs that became available for women.
When I was dean at the University of Akron, we provided the workshops for those secretaries.
Al Misko worked with us.
Al Misko, that's right. Al Misko did them for us. Al Misko would have to demonstrate to the dean, and I happened to be the dean at the time, what the curriculum was. The curriculum was so severe that it would be very difficult for anyone other than a highly professional, educated person to pass the course. And that's what I wanted to hear you say. It is not a social organization.
No.
It is probably the American Medical Association for Secretaries.
You're talking about a certified secretary.
Yes, certified secretaries.
I never passed that. I've never become that. But we had several in our organization who were
certified secretaries. That's a phenomenal thing.
Right,
The next question I want to ask is related somewhat to that too, and that is that how did a person go from whatever you were doing, and I hate to say it this way, but you didn't go to the B&W at a young age, tender age, you know, of 18 or 19.
No.
You were in your 40s or 50s, were you not?
Well, I was kind of wined and dined. I remember the unemployment office, who was Westenbarger.
Westenbarger.
Called me and said that they were looking for an older secretary. There was a new man coming in, Paul Setzler, who was going to be in charge of manufacturing.
That was Worth Westenbarger, whose family still lives in Wadsworth. He was the OB's, the Ohio Board of Employment Education in Barberton.
And I was working at City Hall, and would I consider an interview? And I did, and I went.
And you went from there to the top mahogany row, is that correct?
Correct.
The third question, we're almost out of time here. The third question is related to that too. When you retired, was it true that some of the people for whom you worked retired as well, and that's the reason that you retired, or did you retire simply because you wanted to leave?
When I retired from B&W, I retired to come back to Wadsworth. That
was it?
That was it.
So Wadsworth is still the home.
Right.
Two more questions now regarding Earl, and then we have to call it quits because we're at the end of the hour. Earl's business operations in Wadsworth gave him a tremendous amount of knowledge regarding clothing and then women's clothing. Do you remember why it was that Earl was chosen to take over the women's apparel rather than Dick Curtis taking over the women's apparel, and what did he have to learn new for women's apparel that he had not had yet in the men's store?
Well, I think that one of the things that was hardest to learn is it's so seasonal. Like you have to buy 4 times a year. And he had a lot of help. There were some good women who worked at that store. Earl couldn't have done it alone. He had a lot of good help. But he
Do you remember who the people were?
Marion Bell.
Marion Bell. Marion Bell, Marion Everhart Bell.
Right. And lives on Broad Street. Can't think of her name. That's terrible. I know those people so well. But he didn't do it alone. He had a lot of help. It was very hard. And I think that that Dick Curtis was very happy where he was.
Right. Now they had a old boys club at Dick Curtis that had coffee every morning.
Right.
How did Earl really survive not having the old boys club there and the girls and the ladies' apparel?
I don't know that he was really too much of a part of that.
Is that right?
I don't think he was.
Well, according to some of the other people who have talked, I mean, they would have coffee every morning, and they
I think he had coffee every morning, but he wasn't a native, so to speak. And
I see.
And I think those people who went to high school together and who grew up together were closer. I don't mean that Earl was an outsider, but he was new.
Right. Eileen, this has been absolutely marvelous for you to come here. You've given us an hour of your time and an hour of your memories and certainly an hour of your heart, and you have a lot of that to give. I'm not so sure about the time. You probably are very, very busy taking care of Earl and all those other kinds of things, but we are most appreciative of the fact that you were able to come today to give us these memories and to give us a good thumbnail sketch of Earl Gottwalt, Mayor of Wadsworth and entrepreneur in Wadsworth. Again, Eileen, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure, but as I listened to you and as I've forgotten so many things, I don't know how helpful I was.
You're very helpful.
It was really an honor.
You are very helpful, and if we've forgotten anything, we'll correct it later.
I want to say one thing.
Go
I
ahead.
think the highlight, really, of the chamber was the concert of Robert Miragalato. That was in October of '91, and that was outstanding.
Outstanding. That's
That
right,
was
exactly.
outstanding.
We're going to have him on here. Thank you again.
Okay, very nice.